Linda Burney joins me now. She is the shadow minister on the Labor side of politics. Welcome.
Good afternoon and happy NAIDOC week.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of the peak body for Indigenous health missing out on a seat on the table yesterday?
Well, I couldn't express it any more clearly than what June Oscar has. It's just unbelievable, particularly when you have a look at the rollout in some parts of the country of the vaccine. When you have the rhetoric constantly, where we're going to make sure that Indigenous Australians are looked after, the Indigenous health organisations have done a fantastic job. I mean, seriously, Patricia, why aren't they at the table?
The federal department says it is critical to work with all stakeholders on the rollout, and yesterday's meeting was the first of many. Does this apparent appetite to broaden discussions go far enough? Are you happy to hear that?
Well, I take note of what Lieutenant John Fruins has said. He's heading up, of course, the Vaccine 19 task force. And it is good that there's going to be broader discussions, but for the peak Aboriginal health organisation that has led the way and kept our communities safe. I mean, when you have a look at First Nation people in Australia compared to how some other First Nations people have fared in other countries, it's just remarkable that we've had no deaths so far. There have been about 160 infections, but no deaths. And when you have a look at the, as you know, the status of Aboriginal health, the conditions that people live in, it's remarkable. And it's equally remarkable that the peak Aboriginal health organisation is not at the meeting of the Vaccine Task Force tomorrow.
Is it because of in terms of the vaccination rates among Aboriginal people, is it because of fear as they've heard about, you know, the vaccine and they've heard misinformation, this hesitancy, or do you think it's purely a lack of supply?
Do you know what I think part of the hesitancy is, and it's got a lot to do with social media, let me tell you, is that what I'm hearing, and I've been out to a couple of remote communities, is we're waiting for the good one. So they have picked up on the mixed messaging about AstraZeneca. I've had AstraZeneca. And the hesitancy to me is not so much about they don't want a vaccine. It's about what particular vaccine people get.
So how much of an impact did last week's confusion about who should get AstraZeneca cause, do you think, in Indigenous communities?
Well, I read Pat Turner's statements in the media today, and Pat's ear is closest to the ground when it comes to this particular issue. And she highlighted very clearly, Patricia, that the mixed messaging last week, particularly from the Prime Minister, did little to help the communities that are hearing on one hand, yes, you're going to get this, it's going to be rolled out. On the other hand, it's not safe. People are very confused. And, of course, there is the added complication of misinformation because First Nations people are very connected to the internet and social media, and the misinformation that's gone out on social media hasn't helped as well. It just seems remarkable to me that when you have a look at the vaccine levels, particularly in places like the Kimberley, the Pilbara and the Cape, which are so low, and the Cape, communities in the Cape may not get their first shot to something like December. It just seems remarkable to me that there hasn't been effort put in to a proper campaign of information and encouragement to First Nations communities, which are very discreet in many cases.
The Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken Wyatt, this week promised to legislate an Indigenous voice to Parliament before the next election due in by May. There are only 8 sitting weeks before the end of the year. How confident are you that that's going to happen?
I'm not confident at all. I mean, I listened to Ken's interview with Frank Kelly on Monday morning. He said that, remarkably, that constitutional enshrinement's not off the agenda. I have seen the outcomes of the consultation process that the minister went through, and overwhelmingly the view was put forward that the voice should be constitutionally enshrined. Where Ken, and I have a lot of respect for Ken, has enormous problems is that there is no commitment from the Prime Minister down to a voice legislated or in the Constitution. And really, Patricia, the problem for the coalition is in the party room, where there is no agreement on what should happen going forward. So I just can't see it happening, quite frankly.
Okay, but if he can pull it off, given we know the people who are behind the Uluru Statement from the Heart say legislation shouldn't happen before a referendum, what's Labor's view?
Hello?
What's Labor's view? Do you think you can legislate before a referendum?
Look, Labor hasn't made a full decision about that. Obviously, we are waiting for the government to see, in fact, what the government does. Labor's view is that we support the 3 elements of the Uluru Statement. That is a voice enshrined in the Constitution, as you know. And importantly, a national process of truth-telling and agreement and treaty-making. That's not even on the agenda as far as the government's concerned. And to me, Patricia, I know that you and I have spoken about it before, but the idea of a national process of truth-telling will be transformative for this country. And to me, that is something that the government must be talking about. I don't think they have any desire to move towards agreement or treaty, but that is what Uluru has said, and that is what the Labor Party supports.
Just on another issue, today you've criticised the government's decision to exclude the Family Violence Protection Legal Services Forum from a new Indigenous Leaders Council to address what is a really prevalent issue. What message does it send?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that you've got, as we started out this discussion, with the National Indigenous Health Organisation not being included in the Vaccine 19 Task Force discussions, and now you've got the peak Aboriginal organisation to do with family violence not being included, not only in the main body to provide advice, but the advisory body, which is all Aboriginal to the government. They're not even included on that, and that sends a very, very poor message to the community about how serious you are in terms of having First Nations voices in these processes.
Rio Tinto has promised changes after the destruction of the Juukan Gorge caves, but it's also accused of allowing hundreds of artefacts to be disposed of at a Northern Territory dump. Are these changes too late?
Well, look, Rio Tinto, and I've met the new CEO of Rio Tinto, and I have to say that I took him at face value, and he was genuinely moved by the mistakes that happened at Juukan. There is an issue here, particularly in terms of the federal government's responsibility in terms of this issue through the legislation that's being reviewed at the moment, and the fact that the federal government has a position, as I understand it, to push down to states more responsibility in terms of approvals and so forth. So this issue is something that's before state governments as well as the federal government, and the legislation around protection of cultural heritage has to be real, it has to be strong. And there was a vague commitment at some point from the federal government that there would be standalone legislation around cultural heritage, which seems to be no longer part of the discussion.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Patricia. All the very best.
You too.